Danielle, so I'm excited about this conversation for a number of reasons. One, I think you have a pretty unique voice in the industry around kind of a perspective on digital delivery, BIM, that is really grounded in kind of construction experience. So you have a family business that you kind of had some experience in, but you're also coming from Stanford, and so you've seen maybe how tech has kind of integrated itself into a lot of different industries. Let me start here though. Like, if you look at you graduate from Stanford, you've got the family business, you've got maybe designing roller coasters that came up as like a potential dream, but
That was
then
my dream.
you started via Technic and you leaned into BIM. What was kind of the thought process as you looked upon the landscape of opportunities of what you were going to get into from a career standpoint?
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, like, so a lot of people like ask me why we started via Technic or and why we focused on BIM. And I have to admit, like, early days of via Technic, we didn't actually even do BIM. My thesis was that there was problems in the construction industry that we were taking as an industry like way too long to solve. I sometimes say like I started in the construction industry as a 3-year-old. Like I saw it growing up. And I knew that there were these problems, labor productivity, projects being like way too challenging to build, behind budget or over budget, behind schedule. And I knew that we could solve it through the use of technology and start to like integrate technology into just our everyday workflows like any other industry did.
Hmm.
So we said we were going to meet our clients where they were in their digital journey, bring them to the next level. Back when I started in 2013, 20, wait, yeah, 2013, um, that was not, BIM was not everybody's next level. Like there were a lot of people building in paper. It's like, hey, everything's in paper. Let's like start to move you to digital workflows. Okay, you are in 2D now. Let's start to bring you to 3D. Let's start to bring you to BIM. So BIM was not like the end all be all of Via Technic. The end all be all of Via Technic was solving complex problems through the use of integrated technology. I
Hmm.
started it from a services perspective because I was like, I think they need our help. Right. And so there was this like ability to like integrate into the project, be hand in hand with like the project teams down to the field teams to say, hey, we're going to use this technology together to like build better outcomes.
What were your parents' response to your choice? They were like, "Hey, you're going to take Roush to the next level." Like, what happened?
Yeah, I was going to take my family business route to the next level. That's actually like why I went to business school. My business school essays were about like making an impact on the shape of the Chicago landscape through my family business. Um, at first, I don't think they believed me. And I slowly just started like slipping away from the family business as I was like growing via Technic. And
It was just like your side hustle.
we'll see if they listen to this. I think they were just like, okay, that's cool. Like, can you still manage this Army Corps job? And I was like, yeah, I can still manage this Army Corps job, but I'm also doing this. And I do remember showing them my business cards, and they're like, you have business cards? And I'm like, well, yeah, I have a business. I think though, I think years
Like, this is a
later, I
real
did have
thing,
a
parents.
conversation. I did have a conversation with them, like, hey, I'm not going to follow in your footsteps in the family business. I'm going to follow in your footsteps as entrepreneurs. And I think that it
Man,
took
a
a
good
while.
salesman, even internal to your family. That's
Yes,
impressive. That's good
Just
messaging.
just
there's
delivering
a
it very gently.
there's sales in a lot of things you do, but I think now they're
Yeah.
proud, right? Like they're builders. I built something. They're leaders. I think they see the people around via Technic, our clients, our partners, the people, and I see that they're proud. Every once in a while, they're
Hmm.
like, "Whoa, you guys did that!" So it took a while.
That's very cool. But also, were they ever a customer?
A little bit, yeah. I keep trying to sell my dad precogs. I'm gonna get him one day. But they
I
were. So
mean,
early days,
I sell the GC side. I feel like I need an intro
I was going
into.
to say the problem is you're trying to sell it. You need someone else to sell it.
That's right.
who you gotta talk to? My brother's actually very tech savvy. My brother is this type of person that like grew up on video games. He never wants to do things like the hard way if he can find a better way.
Yes.
And he's in the family business.
Mm.
And so we'll talk a lot about technology. And he asks things in like a different way. That's your into my dad's business at the moment. But we have they actually back to my roller coaster dream. My dad was bidding a project at Six Flags Great America, and we did a 3D model of like the shoring system for how this how like the new roller coaster was going to come together with some of the existing roller coasters and how we are going to like shore up the foundations. So every once in a while they come across a complex challenge, and I'm like, that's what I do.
That's very cool. So, you have the experience from maybe around the dinner table talking about, what general contractors interact with challenges wise. You go to school, then, you get back into the business for a little bit before starting Via Technic. What was your, like, as a full-time employee in the industry, were there some assumptions that you made about the industry that maybe proved not to be true? Like, what was your first experience kind of doing it on a day-to-day basis?
I think assumptions about the industry that proved not to be true. Um, that's a hard question for me to answer. I feel like because I was in the construction industry so long, the longer you're in it, like the more assumptions you gather. A lot of people might be surprised to find out that I also said, "Oh, we do it this way because we've always done it this way," right? It's like a just because sort of thing. So I
Yeah.
realized that some of the, whether it's like contract structure, whether it's how GCs buy out the trade contractors, whether it's the relationship between the owners and the GCs, the owners and the design firms, how GCs and designers interact, like all of that was riddled with like what I'd seen before, which turned into assumptions. What I do is surround myself with people from all different, like outside the industry, right? And that are really good at asking questions and like help you question those assumptions. I founded Via Technic with
Hmm.
Anton, my husband. He did not come from construction, he came from management consulting. They are constantly learning, constantly asking questions. And I catch myself telling him, oh, well, it's because of this. Like, that's the way it's always done. GCs and trades fight. That's how they get the work that's how you get a sub to go to your job site. You yell at them. You say, I needed it yesterday, so they'll come tomorrow.
Hmm.
And I catch myself. I don't know if that's like a perfect answer to your question, but like I felt like actually it's pretty easy to fall into a lot of assumptions.
Yeah, I mean, you get sucked into the culture of that mindset pretty quickly. And I think I experienced that as well. I was business econ kind of background coming out of college and then did have some assumptions. I don't remember all of them. I think some of them were that it was not as innovative. It was more backward in nature than it actually was. And I think I've said this before, but like the my first project was the Navy Seabee Museum in Port Hueneme. Shout out to your
You're
past there,
welcome.
Lars.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I mean Seabees have such a cool history. I think one of my takeaways from that project was just learning about the Seabees was unbelievable. But what I found on that project was at every level of the field, there's people solving really hard problems with innovative techniques. One of the biggest challenges, they don't have the mechanisms always to capture that best practice and take it to the next one. So everyone's kind of recrafting. But Lars, coming out of the Navy, what was your experience like? I mean, decided not just to like jump in. You started a company without really any industry experience at all.
Yeah, so I had no assumptions and I was just super curious, asked a lot of questions, and then when someone told me something that was ridiculous, like, well, this is just the way it's been done. Here's a 4,000 line item spreadsheet that you have to copy and paste each email address into Microsoft to send out an invitation to bid. I was like, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. That's insane, Or you need to buy a fax machine. I'm like, why do I need to buy a fax machine? Well, that's how you get bids. Well, there's this thing called fax to email. Yeah, we don't do it that way. Huh? And so like little people sort of sharing the way they figured out how to make it work for their machine, me interpreting that and saying, okay, that's fascinating. I think there's a better way. but being comfortable enough and sort of betting on yourself to be like, no, I'm just going to go do it this way because I know I can achieve the same result. It'll just be faster. It'll just be quicker. It'll be less friction for me. I'll get up on glide slope, quicker. And I think, and Danielle, I appreciate and even now, start a bit, solo construction company, starting another one. It's like, it's so easy to get back into well, it worked there, so it'll work here. I mean, it's the same thing. This is the way it's been. And you have to pause and say, I know it worked then, but can something work better now? And you have to consciously reinvent many things in every department, just constant improvement, right? And the challenge I feel is, and I think about other industries that sort of share this, manufacturing, right? They're building things, but there's an assembly line. Usually the widget comes out a little bit quicker than a 2-year long, $500 million hospital or whatever. And so I don't see us having these easy moments to ever inject change, or disruption into an organization. And that's why it's like, don't touch it. We finally got it working. Just, yeah, I know it's not the most efficient, but just keep it going. Don't touch it. And so it's like, whenever is there a good time to, break the machine, to go in there and tweak some things? It's extremely disruptive to organizations, and people don't like it because they finally figure it out, right?
So Lars, you bring up so many good points there. And I think to your point about disruption and how do you make change, your fax to email example is really compelling to me because so I remember those moments. And actually as a kid, I would sit on bid day by the fax machine and run them over to my parents.
Super exciting, right? This is cool stuff.
Yeah. But you know what? Your fax to email thing is interesting because it's the next leap. We're going to get rid of the fax machine, but we're still going to accept the fact that the subcontractors and the material suppliers, they use fax and they're going to send their bids via fax.
Yeah, here we go.
And if you made too big of a leap, what would have happened is you would have gotten no bids. You would have gone to this fully digital system that the stakeholder ecosystem wasn't ready for. And I think that's something that has been super powerful to Via Technic's growth. One, with these assumptions, your question about assumptions is cool, right? There's reasons for these assumptions though, right? There's reasons that these things are broken. It's not just nobody knows what they're talking about. It's super easy to solve, right? It's not. There's very good reasons, and kind of understanding those reasons, understanding where people are at, pushing them forward, but understanding that it is going to take steps. And I tell people maybe you can kind of jump from step 1 through 4, but 2 to 3 has to kind of be in there. You're just going through it quickly or something.
Yeah.
Right? So the fax to email, right? Was that next step that got us away from fax.
Well, and I think it's interesting that you've essentially built a business and a business model around that concept. When you and I first met, shout out to Tom Feliz, I was talking to you about kind of a digital twin strategy from a GC standpoint. And what I really appreciated was you didn't start with Voyager, which is a platform that Via Technic has for owners around kind of supporting the digital twin environment. You started with well, what's your data strategy at a project level to ensure that the right inputs are there to enable a digital twin strategy? And so I think to the point being made, it is you have to meet the market where they're at and then kind of show them the way to what is possible and kind of level them up.
All right, sponsor break. Lars, real quick. When was the last time you got a new set of drawings from an architect and they didn't cloud anything?
Well, the one that cost me a couple $100,000 was back, I think, in 2017. So, yeah, lesson learned there.
Yeah, so what I like about what Trick Tools is building is they're looking at tools to help kind of remove the mundane from the job site. And I, same as you, every time there was a bulletin or an addendum, I would go back to the designers and ask them to at least highlight or give me a cover letter on the changes. And that was always pulling teeth. But Trunk Tools is now automating that. So you get a bulletin come in, it automatically highlights the changes. You don't have to do a thing.
Well, it's also hitting RFIs, right? It's also hitting submittals. And when we think about standardizing ops, right, and providing that, sort of resource to those field operators. What I see it as, it's sort of like this like mentor within the company that structures, standardizes, keeps it moving in the right direction, looks out for risk. And just this last week, I had a QC manager just pass along a submittal to an owner without doing a review because he was too busy, and it was wrong. And the classic owner statement is, "Did you even review this?" Right? So this to me is carte blanche. We absolutely did, and think about getting that first pass before your field manager ever even actually has to do the first pass. Someone's doing it for them. So to me, it's about speed. It increases accuracy and helps standardize ops out in the field. Right?
Yeah, and this is the kind of AI that we've talked about on the
Yeah.
podcast, really appreciating, right? Which is looking at ways to elevate the craftsman at the heart of project delivery.
Give me time back so I can be out in the field managing risk. Right?
Yeah,
Yep.
100%. So, all right, if you're a little curious, check it out, trunktools.com/podcast. And if you mention Construction Conversations, you get a discount. Do it.
Discount demos are free, and and you guys get a discount. So let's
That's
go.
right.
So when you look at maybe even on the, coming out of school, you choose via Technic, you build via Technic around this concept of like leveling up the industry. How did you settle on the different services for the different verticals in the industry of what level up means to those different verticals?
We listened to what the industry needed. Not from like a, hey, I need a BIM, or hey, can you laser scan this? But hey, this is the outcome I want on my project, right? Or like, examples like, hey, I'm building this data center project and we can't build it fast enough. We did the last one in 18 months and they want this one in 14. How can you help me do that? Those sort of, like, listening to those sort of problems, and then starting to piece together the process, the technology that like needs to come together to get that. And so, things were very like incremental. I think the core of everything that we did was data and how people were making decisions from that data. Even if they weren't like, hey, I need a data strategy. And like early days of AI, or sorry, early days of Via Technic, I remember having AI on our business card. People were like, what's that? So like they weren't necessarily like explicitly asking it, but all I did as a GC was make decisions. What goes first? What goes next? Who are we buying from? When things changed, what's the next best decision? And so the core of what we did and the services that we kept adding on were an extension from that. I think the other interesting side of Via Technic and kind of like how we grew the services company is who we built it for, right? So like my background, as we talked about, is in the general contractor realm. But then as we were listening to them, they're like, hey, we want to do this, but hey, maybe my plumber or the drywall guy, they need help, right? And they knew that the whole trade contractor ecosystem, 14 years ago, needed to come together in order for them to meet those coordination goals to start to build this better. So that brought us down to the trades. And then little by little, what ended up happening is we did become pretty well known for solving problems. But that there's kind of glory in solving the problem sometimes. And then there's a lot of pain. You're like, man, we should have never had this problem to begin with. And that's actually what brought us to working with owners. And I think what's really cool now is that because we hit those different stakeholders, we're actually able to solve problems at those like integration points that we weren't able to when we started. And so now there's like kind of tech and services that come from those integration points, right? How do you take design documents and make them more constructible? How do you turn over construction phase BIM into a digital twin for an owner to use?
Is it,
Long answer, but I
are,
hope that makes sense.
are these? I mean, but based on what I heard you just say, like, what's the root cause of these problems? Is it like a lack of education? Is it like industry knowledge? Is it like someone with a lot of money who wants to go build like a 200-unit multifamily job and just doesn't know it? But he goes hire his neighbor who's a GC, and it's like, what? Why are these problems systemic? And if they are systemic, what's the root cause? Based on the patterns that you've seen?
And based on what I've seen, I would not say there's one root cause. I think that makes it hard to unravel the problem. I think one of the largest root causes that we really need to work through is alignment of incentives
Yeah.
across the different stakeholders. And then I haven't like fully articulated like my thought here, but something about like the appreciation of the knowledge that they bring to the table. So a
Mhm.
big thing at Via Technic is like bringing together the right people with the right information together at the right time. When that breaks down, that's where we see all these problems, right? Like we just had a client panel at the Via Technic retreat, and one of the owner on the panel shared that he spent, let's say something like $80 million on a construction project. And then he spent $20 million after it opened to reconfigure it to really fit their manufacturing needs. That's not abnormal when you don't have the people who run the manufacturing lines, the people who do operations and maintenance on that facility at the table
At the
with the
table. Yeah.
designers,
Yeah.
right?
No,
So I
we did a
think
lot of
that's like
healthcare
one of the
construction.
biggest root causes, but there's a lot.
Yeah, no, sorry. I was saying we did a lot of healthcare, and we still do a lot of healthcare construction, and it's imperative that you have the doctors and the leads in every department to say, well, this is actually the piece of equipment that we're using, and it's 6 inches wider. Well, that changes the whole layout of the room. You know,
Mhm.
yeah. No, I think I loved your comment on aligned incentives. I've said as a GC, and I love the fact that you were in it. It's like anyone can go buy a construction project cheaper from somewhere else. Like it's just you can always get drywall cheaper from a different sub. You just it's just not that hard, right? And when people put construction in this bucket that's solely around price, good luck. And I think a lot of the industry or a lot of the owner to GC relationships are still in that category around just, well, I can go get it cheaper down here. Even GCs the subs, right? Why is it so expensive with you? It's less expensive over here. And again, I appreciate your aligned incentives because how we approach jobs is like there's a significant analysis around risk on every pursuit and where are things going to go wrong, and let's just go have a conversation and make sure that we're aligned to be in this together because construction is really freaking hard. Like it is just hard, and everyone's got to be on their A game.
You bring up a great
I mean, I think it
point,
would
right? So
be.
like contract structures are part of this, but I think there's like more to that. You bring up the conversation about like risk. How many people have conversations like during bid leveling or negotiations, right? You're talking about like, hey, do you have this many, cubic yards of concrete, right? And hey, do you have this as the schedule? And there's this like intense discussion on what you're providing and kind of like the technical details of the scope instead of like collaboration, instead of risk mitigation, instead of like, do you actually understand the outcomes that make or break this project from a delivery
Yeah.
standpoint, from a end user standpoint, and what are you doing to like get to that?
Or we're doing an office to an affordable housing project right now, 18 stories, and you know I'll just say the trajectory it was going on with the developer and the designer. There was going to be, I mean, there are already challenges, but it was going to be like 10 times more challenging. And so we're like pulling it back and like deconstructing elements of risk to where the designer's like, oh yeah, I never thought about that. I'm like, dude, that's your job, man. Like, okay, well, let's roll up the sleeves. Let's figure out these elements of because knowing that we want this end state, right? How are we going to get there? And but a lot of times they're just like, oh yeah, we can do that, right? And I just as a boots on ground builder, there's so much planning that I think if a GC isn't involved, there's elements of constructability that are so often left off.
So you're kind of in the middle of a monologue.
Yeah, I do that
Uh,
sometimes. No, it's amazing how when the aligned incentives and getting people to operate as a team rather than fight each other. And I think when and again historically being a government contractor, I can't really have too many relationships with my customer, right? They sort of keep it at bay. But I think that's like that's part of the problem, And they actually, I swear, they go to school to not trust contractors. And I was one of them, but I was always like,
Yeah.
well, I can't do this job. So what do you need from me so that I can help you do your job better? But so many of them don't take that approach.
One
I mean,
of the
that's where
things
like,
about from like a World Cup perspective, right, is like everybody
ooh,
coming together on the World Cup teams are playing together for the first time.
Yeah.
And that's like very analogous to construction, right? And I think that's like part of the aligned incentives. I think that's part of appreciating the roles that everybody else plays. It's our first time going live. And we're going live on a $2 billion business that starts and ends in a 3-year cycle. So like what are some of the things that like the World Cup does, right? Like they do the friendly games where USA plays Germany and they get to know each other and they get to play before it's prime time. And I think there is a lot to learn from that. I've heard of, I've never been on these job sites where they'll do like team building exercises before they start, but I
Yeah.
think there needs to be a lot more thought about like how do you get people who've never worked together before from different companies who are building something that they've never building something they've never built before, and how do you get them actually working together?
we
And I
did
think
some
there's
of that on some Disney work. Uh, Sorry to interrupt you.
go ahead.
But yeah, we did some of that team building kind of element on some Disney work, and it was unique. And one, I love the idea that you just created like cross promotional content for like World Cup plus like
Yeah.
this podcast. So we'll have FIFA like co-brand this episode. But you're absolutely right. Like you jump right into it in these projects. You don't really think much at all about morale or team building or culture. Obviously, we've interviewed a number of superintendents who, the really good ones, pay a lot of respect to culture and are really intentional about the culture they create. But how do we codify some of that so it's not so personnel dependent? And so there's little milestones that happen of, hey, if we're handing off different iterations of design, in addition to a drawing review, we're going to do kind of a team integration exercise, and this is what it looks like. Because I think to the points being made, having aligned incentives really matters. But also in this kind of labor crunch that we're at, the people we want upstream in these conversations are so rarely available, and so this is where I think AI has a role to play in helping bring upstream the kind of expertise that is needed in some of these conversations. But I don't know. Have you seen have you seen that done really, like, if you Daniel, if you were to think about like the best project you were ever on, what were the dynamics ingredients at play early in like the OAC environment?
The best project I was ever on. That's hard. That's like asking like who my favorite kid is. Um,
Yeah.
you know, I'll answer it this way. We've been on a few projects at Via Technic where at the very beginning of the project, we've created a joint vision statement. And that vision statement has like come up over and over. Sometimes it comes up, somebody brings up the vision statement after we haven't heard it for a month. And you're like, oh yeah, that's what's bringing us here. I think
Hmm.
rallying people behind a why and making sure we have a shared vision does a lot, right? Like that can fix little cracks around incentives. That can fix little cracks around, collaboration and information trade-off. If we all feel like we know where we're going, and those vision statements have been like very inspirational, in a pretty fun way.
I love that. Lars, have you ever created like success criteria for your team?
Yeah, we've done a number of partnering sessions, what the Navy used to call like partnering, during the
Yeah.
beginning of a job, and like halfway through, we would do those sessions. Um, they were pretty good. Yeah, I'm trying to think though, like, did it all? At some level, it felt forced. If you want my honest opinion, because I don't felt that they again, in that sort of government to contractor relationship, they were just like on a $20 million contract. Oh, these guys are making $20 million. It's like, no, 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 we're not. Right? You're paying us. But we got a lot of vendors to pay. Right? There's a lot of scope here we got to do. Right? There's a lot of risk, a lot of schedule. And I got stories for days on just crazy. I mean, the fact I got a story. I'm going to digress, Danielle. So I'm in negotiations with doing a historic renovation on a beautiful beach house there on the Pacific Ocean, and it's the same guy that designed the Rose Bowl, so famous building. And I'm in negotiations with the contracting officer, and we're going through line item, and it gets and they always like to poke at your general conditions. It's like, well, do you want me to be able to manage the job or not? Like, let's have a real conversation. And the individual's like, well, I need to talk about your labor rate for your laborer. I'm like, okay, well, what do you think it should be? Minimum wage. At the time, minimum wage was like $15 an hour. I'm like, you do know this is a government project, and there is this thing called Davis-Bacon, for which there's your base plus your fringe, which puts it at probably about $58.75. And the dude had no idea what that was. How do I have a real conversation with someone who doesn't
15 bucks an
understand
hour?
the rules of engagement by which the contract is actually written on? And so that's where it's just like, well, if you've always thought everyone on this job site makes minimum wage because for whatever reason someone told you a construction worker is only worth minimum wage, what is the perception? What is this reality?
You should have gone
that
and
we are
gathered up
somehow
like 500
colliding
high
in?
schoolers.
Yeah.
You should have just gathered 500 high
I
schoolers.
just share that because like that was sort of like a lot of times that's where partnering starts. That's where that like leveling of like the world I live in versus the world you live in comes into play. Obviously, more sophisticated owners come in and they're much more prepared to have more dynamic conversations and things like that. But anyway, I just share that because that one always stuck with me as just this like, do you even have an understanding of what your contract says? Not my contract, what your contract says. And how can we partner when you don't understand your contract? So
Your story is an interesting one to me because I do feel like the longer you stay in construction, like everybody has that story that sort of burned them, that stays with them. And I think that the longer you stay in construction, like the more of those battle wounds that you have. And I think like where I sit today, I'm just like, how can I help people not make that same mistake again? And how do we just like keep getting a little bit better and better? And actually, like sometimes in conversations with Steven, he's helped me realize this. Like, for every like experience where you do feel like you've been burned, there's those experiences that like bring you energy. And I try to like also just focus on those.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
like we can focus on those wins. We'll keep it going because I do think it's something that like contributes to the labor shortage. Honestly, right? Construction's really hard.
No, Danielle, I mean, it was one of the reasons I sold my construction company. I was like, I don't want to deal with this anymore. There's no way. I'm done, But then it was like, there's some good things. In fact, it's right where I belong to continue to lead really good people, And I understand it, and go make a positive impact. And I will share, like, doing it round 2 is different from round 1 because it's like I sort of know how I know how it works out, and being able to choose rather than feeling like forced, a lot more freedom. It's like, all right, we can choose to work with them or not. No big deal. We don't feel like we have to.
Hey guys, if your experience was anything like mine when I was a PM, change orders were kind of a pain. You send the change order, then you spend the next 2 weeks chasing it. Subs are texting you updates. Meanwhile, you have a change order log buried in email. Your spreadsheet doesn't match theirs, and you're just trying to figure out what's actually been approved. Meanwhile, your subs are waiting on answers so they can get paid. The owner doesn't really have the visibility they need into cost exposure, and nobody finds out that the numbers don't reconcile at all until closeout. At which point, everyone suddenly disagrees about everything. That's not a people problem, it's a systems problem. Everybody on the job is working at their own setup. Your ERP, their spreadsheet, someone else's inbox. Change orders end up getting stuck in the middle of all of it. Well, ClearStory fixes that. It's a shared cloud-based change order log where GCs, specialty contractors, and owners all see the same information in real time, which is key. Subs submit and track their work. GCs stay on top of status. Owners see cost exposure before it becomes a surprise.
No more digging through email trying to reconcile the logs at closeout. Just change orders under control, which is a unique concept. Check it out at clearstory.build.
Well, and I think your story, Lars, also highlights that at the heart of misalignment is at times just a data gap, right? And if you think about
100%.
how those data gaps and kind of misalignments happen, I think that that is present on the owner side as much as it is on maybe the field level. And I think one of the things, Danielle, that I've appreciated about
Yeah.
how Via Technic has evolved is going upstream and helping to create alignment with all of the downstream challenges that we're so well aware of, right? So getting the opportunity to work with some of the owners that you do, I won't mention all the logos, but like, was that always part of the thesis, or has that maybe evolved into, you know, hey, this is where we need to live if we're really going to try and level up the industry. We need to get as far upstream as possible.
Yeah, as I sort of mentioned before, day one at Via Technic, it was like squarely in construction. But we noticed that we did need to get as upstream as possible to prevent problems before they happen. Right, to just like actually put things in motion so that the problems we faced on the last job never even appear on the next job. What was sort of cool about getting upstream and working more with owners is it brought us like all the way to the other end, right? So we started in construction, moved as early as possible, like early planning, design, just like what is this project even supposed to be, all the way now through operations, which is really cool to see that kind of like full life cycle coming together. And so now at Via Technic, like very much that thesis is like the entire delivery process to building operations and sort of that like refresh or vitalization kind of living aspect of like this building.
Yeah, I think it's pretty powerful because I think even with some of the clients that I interact with, I think having an awareness of how each of the stakeholders on a project are impacted by maybe various inputs, whether related to design or downstream kind of deliverables, it gives us an empathy that we're able to service all those different stakeholders in a unique way. What is I've kind of felt that the GC side of the industry is becoming more and more aware of their need to play a very strategic role in kind of the digital delivery elements of a project, even if there aren't owner requirements. Are you, and you're in more owner conversations than I am, are they seeing that? What's maybe their take on how GCs are evolving or not evolving?
So that's a good question. I do think that there is pressure on the GC right now. And the owner is one of those people putting pressure. The trades is the other. What I
Mm,
see as like the strongest pulls for digital delivery right now is the fact that the data means so much to the owner. The data that's created during design and construction creates this like digital found, right? Like you have a digital building and you have your physical building. And in the world of AI, where people care more about their data, that's like such a strong pull. The other pull that I see is like how we actually build from that data, right? And that's the pull from the trade contractor. That's the pull that's saying, hey, I'm going to use this data to procure better. I'm going to use this
mm,
data to think about what am I building in the field versus what am I building in the shop. We use this data to make sure that I give the best information for the people who are building so that like time on tools is as high as possible, right? And I'm changing the productivity paradigm because I don't have enough people to, I can barely find enough people. And if I see somebody like not on a tool, right, not building, not active, like that's the death of me. So there's these things that are squeezing the owner, and then that are squeezing the GC. And I think
mhm.
the owners are starting to see the difference between GCs that are not providing the value proposition a GC needs to provide, right? Like orchestrating that job site, mitigating risk, and ensuring great delivery outcomes. And then I see a group of GCs who's really stepping up, who is saying that like we understand how important this building is to you, and we're going to make sure that it works for your business. We understand that like if it's late, it costs you money beyond like extended general conditions, right? Like I'm not getting rent from my
Revenue.
apartment
Yeah.
or the hotel, all that kind of stuff. So I kind of see a little bit of a bifurcation right now, and I think like the GCs have an interesting moment to step up and get to the core of what they were there for, right? That risk mitigation, that orchestration, that great project outcome. And I'm really inspired by the ones I see doing that. And I think I'm seeing the ones who aren't stepping up getting squeezed between the owner and the trade.
That's actually such a good explanation of the power of the digital, explaining it as like BIM is data. And if you look at what enables any of these kind of AI technologies to really be effective is context and data, right? So like if I'm gonna go with a prompt, I'm gonna pull in a transcript, TXT file of a transcript of a meeting, give it that context, and then kind of build my prompt on top of that. And so
Yep.
owners, to your point, are often lacking that data because sure, the digital twin is like the Hollywood BIM element of digital twin is often focused, but behind that is the data. And so if from a project delivery standpoint, you're not organizing yourself to enable the owner, you're compromising their ability not just at handover, but for many years to come to commercialize the data elements of the asset. That's interesting.
Yeah, no, and that's a big thing, right? Like I think that's a wave that this industry needs to be ready for. And like maybe one of my hot takes, that's why when I hear people say like BIM is dead or BIM is dying, right? Like in the future of AI, like BIM won't exist. I think that's like the craziest thing. And it's like super misinformed in terms of like what is the power of BIM? The power of BIM is data. And data has never been more important to our industry.
Is there
Or
is
actually, maybe data has never been more valued by our industry. It was always important, right? But we've
yeah.
had problems capturing it and integrating it and using it. But it's truly valued now.
Are there other ways builders and owners can get that data without using BIM?
Today, I think
I'm
BIM is
sort of
one of
I'm
the
sort
most
of like being that
powerful.
other side, and so, yeah, it's sort of saying like, well, BIM's dead. Well, if the value is the data, and I agree, is there another way for someone AI to get that data, or sort of you have to go through this process, and that's why it is valuable.
Oh, I think that like the software could evolve and parts of the process can evolve.
Hmm.
But I think that as long as humans are leveraging the data, BIM is super powerful, right? Because
Yeah.
BIM at its core is geospatial data.
Right.
And there's data that makes more sense when I put it in geospatial context than when I don't. What does AHU 101 mean? Nothing. It means
Yeah.
nothing to you, even if like that's actually an AHU on your project. But now I assign like geospatial context and I understand like where it is, what it looks like.
Hmm.
That starts to mean
Where it
something more.
feeds, yeah, where it feeds, what each of those rooms it does. Yeah, 100%. Love
Yeah.
it.
But I think as like we start to leverage like more robotics, right? And just kind of like a computer generated understanding and use of this data, like it might look very different. But if I think about like what the core of it is, right? And so software perspective, process perspective, absolutely those things will continue to evolve and they should. But the power of BIM is data and that has never been stronger.
Okay.
And I think another way of saying that, Lars, is like BIM as a noun will get commoditized, is becoming commoditized to some extent. BIM as a verb, in terms of the
The
process and the
process.
workflow and the focus on how data is stored and
Hmm.
managed and gathered, is more relevant than ever.
Yeah.
How much margin, or more importantly, how many headaches have you had as a result of margin lost to something that was buried in the documents? A requirement in the spec that didn't match the contract, a flow down clause that shifted risks nobody caught, a conflict between drawings and addenda that showed up 3 months too late as a denied change order. I'm sure each of you guys are experiencing a bit of the cold sweats just thinking about some of those scenarios. So these aren't rare events, as you know. They happen on nearly every project, and most projects just absorb the loss because there hasn't been a better way to manage it. That's what Document Crunch is changing. So, Document Crunch is the AI risk management platform built for you guys. It reads construction documents the way your best expert would, identifying and verifying risk with answers you can trust and trace. The trace part of that is really important, as we found with some of these other AI tools out there. Here's what makes it different from general AI. Crunch AI verifies before it answers. Every answer traces back to the exact document, page, and clause it came from. So when your decision gets tested in an OAC meeting or a change order dispute, you know you are on solid ground. It's not just about finding a risk, it's about making sure risk is identified, tracked, and acted on, so nothing gets lost between pre-con and the field. Construction has accepted preventable loss as a cost of doing business for far too long. Document Crunch is setting a new standard. Learn more at documentcrunch.com/construction conversations. Check them out.
Maybe treating Lars as a detractor, even though he isn't. Um, what one of the conversations we've had is like, at what size of build does BIM, the noun and the verb, make sense? How have you historically thought through that, Danielle?
I think there's like a sliding scale. Um, I think about I think about risk, right? And I think about, hey, what are those problems to start to like solve before you see them in the field? How big of a risk is certain aspects of quality or constructability or schedule? And that's going to kind of like slide the scale up in terms of like the level of BIM workflows that you might have on a project. One of my favorite projects was like a 20,000 square foot WeWork job that we did back in like 2015 or something. That, like, all things considered, like you could build a small TI without BIM. But the value proposition was, I need to build this as fast as possible. The WeWork business model was that they only opened on the first of the month. So if you were one day late, let's say they were going to have like an August 1st opening date. If you were one day late, you didn't cost them one day, you cost them a whole month. Now their opening date was September 1st. So we use BIM in a very, very lightweight way. Like you couldn't build from that model from like a fabrication perspective or anything. But we took a very lightweight model, combined it with the schedule, worked with the GC to like resequence and start to say, hey, I see work happening here, nothing's happening here. What can we start here? Or hey, I see this activity lagging this activity by this much. I can see that we can bring those crews closer together. Can we shorten that lag? And through that, helped them open a whole month earlier. So, like, that would normally be a project people would say no. So, I think it's more just the sliding scale. Is there an aspect of risk, and can, there's usually some sort of like small fit. It might not be the most robust BIM process that you'd see on like a data center.
I think maybe staying in kind of the GC vertical, um, for the GCs who have an internal function, um, how do you position what partnership with the VIA Technic looks like? And this is a little bit like handing off my homework for you to complete for me. But as you talk with GCs about how to partner with VIA Technic versus lean into building themselves, it's a classic maybe build versus kind of buy analysis. Um, how have you seen all of the ways in which GCs have differentiated themselves kind of historically play into that analysis? Like, how's that conversation? What do you see GCs that are winning doing differently than those that aren't, maybe?
I think there's like two parts of your question, right? So like as they're thinking, as GCs may be thinking about like building a robust BIM function internally, right? Like what's the value proposition of using a VIA Technic? I would say like that first part of your question, there's a spectrum, but I think like the two biggest things, um, BIM means a lot of different things, and there's a lot of different skill sets that go into that. VIA Technics invested a ton in like pretty unique capabilities, building AI on top of BIM, 4D, 5D, like integrating the BIM into facilities management, laser scan to BIM, right? Like there's all these different components that actually take quite a bit more investment than I think most GCs realize. Like you don't just hire a team of four and think that you're going to do all this stuff. And I think sometimes there's just like a misunderstanding of like how much we've invested to build this and what that investment's going to take if you're going to do it. The biggest companies can, and I think why the largest companies in the GC realm are our clients is a trusted partner that can extend their capabilities and start to like get them to their what's next. it's pretty rare
Mm.
that a client of ours, what's next, is truly what's next for us. We've probably done it before. That being said, we also have a history of doing the what's next, right? Like building that thing for the first time with one of our clients. And so there's sort of this like tried and true capability of like, how do you do something that nobody's done before? And so in some ways, it sort of like de-risks getting to that future. Um, the bright outcomes that they can achieve are so much stronger through this partnership model. Second half of your question is like what I see differentiating like the best GCs, something like that.
Yeah, you made a good question out of a bad one, so I appreciate that.
Well, I was trying to listen. I think you had two questions. So in terms of like what I see differentiating the best GCs, I do think that they're understanding that it's not like project management and how we build over here and tech and innovation over here. It's just like integrated, right? It's just naturally part of how we build. How do we continuously improve outcomes? How do we
Hmm.
take a process that just isn't working for us anymore
Yeah.
and start to do things differently? I had one GC client say that VDC was the central nervous system of their organization. And that stood out to
Mm.
me because he also said that to me at a time when not everybody felt that way. Most people, like, I look at a GC's org chart and it's like, oh, wow, I could snip this little line right here and VDC goes away. And the rest of the company's like unaffected. That was weird, right? And I think when it's just
Hmm.
like the ability to like use tech, the ability to improve processes embedded in the organization, that's what's propelling, I think, like the best GCs forward.
Well, I think we're running out of time, and I want to be sensitive to your time. Maybe one last question. If you look at, you know, talk to your younger self, kind of heading into the industry, you've got Via Technic as a side hustle. You're still doing a day job at Roush. What's one thing that you've learned now that you'd want to pass off to the younger version of yourself?
There's a lot of things. I thought about this question before. I think my younger self was so focused on learning what we were doing in construction. I would ask a ton of questions like, hey, why is the sanitary sewer pipe dug at this, you know, elevation? Um, I think I would have spent much more time understanding the people behind construction, asking questions around why they got into this, um, what matters to them, like what drives them, what pisses them off. So I think, yeah, advice to my younger self. It was cool that you spent a lot of time learning what we were doing. Spend a little bit more time learning about the people behind it, and it's something I do a lot now today.
Well, this has been good, and I appreciate you taking time with us, Danielle. I think you're one of the like you're really polished, and you have a really unique perspective on the industry, but you also are super grounded in understanding the kind of elements and nuances and quirks of the industry. And so I think that combination is unique, and I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks, guys. This was fun. I appreciate it. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you.